Thank you so much for coming along. Eddie and I wanted to get you on here. I mean, you spent a number of years in the PE space and being a talent director for the likes of HG and BlackRock. And I suppose we would love to run through a few questions to get your thoughts on diversity inclusion within the PE space and what that looks like at the moment. So I suppose before we touch on D&I, Eddie and I are quite keen to understand how you actually got into private equity in the first place. So how did you make that move?
Um, so BlackRock, I was headhunted into BlackRock, and they have private equity, but they also have, the regular fund management business and technology. So that was a mix of
Yep.
everything. Um, and actually the same for HG. HG is a pure play private equity firm. Um, when I was headhunted into that, I mean, I really had no idea about software companies which they invest in. So that was a real new world to me. And so I kind of with Get Him kind of fell into it. I think I was probably not the typical fit for them. Private equity like to hire people who are exactly in that industry, have done an exact job in that industry, have many, and many years of experience and are a real proof point. So yeah, I was
Hmm.
definitely a different fit for them. But yeah, headhunted into both, but sort of fell into it in a
Yep.
way as well, and kind of pretended I sort of knew something about software, but I definitely did by the end.
How did you find the transition of getting into private equity?
Um, it's definitely different. So I come from a corporate model, which was BlackRock, and so asset management as an industry in the kind of corporate world is a lot older and more developed than the private equity world, which is, I think, technically only been around since the 60s. So even though that's a long time ago, it still feels new. So the rules of the road are different. It was the partnership model, which again is quite a different model to a corporate structure.
Mm.
So I definitely found that strange. It was quite a big partnership as well, and growing really quickly. So that took me a while to get used to that. And private equity is an industry. Most of those houses are very, very similar. They're very, very similar to each other. So once you get any
Mhm.
out of the rules of the road, you learn how it's structured, how it works. It's deal partners. It's quite male dominated. How you influence people, how they do deals. If you go from one private equity firm to another, it's all the same. The software side took me a little bit longer to get used to the lingo and how it really works. But again, all software, they all run the same. They use the same terminology. It's the same way of running. All these businesses were kind of SaaS businesses. So again, even more similar to each other. So once I learned all that, I think it took maybe a good 6 months to figure it all out. And by the time I did that,
Yep.
then I was fine. But yeah, it definitely was a learning curve from where I come from.
Focusing on the diversity and inclusion piece, obviously you've been on the side of working for a private equity fund,
Mhm.
but how would you describe the current state of diversity inclusion at the moment in the private equity space?
I think evidently you're still learning about it. And, I really have a question mark in general around private equity, around their understanding of DEI or whatever you call EDI, however we might term it. I think it hasn't been something they had to do. I think investors into private equity funds have said now, listen, we need to see your statistics. We need to see you're thinking about it in the same way you're thinking about ESG and what are you doing about it. So I think this has been driven by a need from investors saying to GPs, this is what you need to be doing and this is what we need to see, but it's still quite nascent. It really is. And I think when we talk about diversity, what we're really talking about is what can be measured. So, in this country, it's gender. So looking at gender. There is a little bit of looking at and understanding that private equity firms are generally made up of people who are very similar to each other. All went to university, all very similar.
Hmm.
And I would say lacking in terms of all forms of diversity, really. So I think there's a sense that, we should partner with organizations like SEO and Level 20 to try and bring in those from underrepresented groups. So perhaps minorities or, lower socioeconomic groups. But they started with gender where everybody starts. But I think myself, there's such a long way to go. there really is. And I just do wonder about them being bought into it. Are they really bought into it as private equity firms? Are they doing it because their investors are saying this is really what you need to be doing? You should really care about this.
Definitely. And Elizabeth, what are the sort of specific challenges that you perceive, from a D&I perspective for private equity currently?
So private equity firms, generally, regardless of how it looks from the outside, private equity investors are quite risk averse around people. So when they buy something, even though they do a lot of due diligence, you then try to mitigate the risk as much as you can until you sell it again. And so they're trying to build and create value in it. But I don't think they have a full understanding, the investors, of the people within them and what it takes to build a culture, what inclusion means, what diversity means. And so I think from that perspective, I think bringing in people from different backgrounds looks like a risk to private equity investors. So if you bring in someone who hasn't, let's just say you invest in software, if you bring in someone that hasn't invested in software before and doesn't come from that industry and doesn't have something in the background that they recognize, or they don't know them, it's too much of a risk for them. So they tend not to hire. So they tend to keep to the same circles they've always kept to, which are generally white and generally male, and keep reusing those people. And so you don't get that new, fresh influx of ideas, of different types of people. I think the GPs are hiring more females, but they tend not to stay. So you've got that. But then if you haven't got an inclusive environment, it's quite difficult. And I don't think GPs mean to not be inclusive, but they don't really understand what inclusivity really means. So you've got to get that right before you get the diversity part right. But I think they're the main bits that I would say in terms of other industries. They really are still struggling with that. They still don't understand, well, why are females not staying, and why can only hire lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Like, they want to hire one or two people, but there's no role modeling because you look up at the top and it's white and male. And for females, it's kind of the same. It's like these long hours. The different generations don't really want to do those things anymore. So there are different expectations. Private equity's model is still very old-fashioned. You either fit into it or you don't. So despite some of the best efforts, that is quite a different challenge from other industries. Even banking, which, a lot of the people who started private equity probably come from banking. That's still a bit behind, but you still have more diverse and inclusive banks than you would have private equity firms. So I think they are unique to private equity in a way. They're just a bit further behind the other developed industries.
When you were in your role at either sort of BlackRock or HG Capital, was there anything specific that you did to sort of try and overcome those challenges?
Yeah. So we set up a DEI committee. I don't love committees or the thought of them, but you've got to start somewhere. So when I joined, because I had done a lot of that work with BlackRock, and they were far advanced at BlackRock, again, just because they've been going longer, huge teams, they understood why they were doing it. We set this up and we figured out what are the work streams we need to look at here, what's really important. And gender came up, ethnic diversity came up, LGBTQ plus. So they were kind of the main work streams that we worked with. But we carried out an inclusion survey, and I think that was the very first time that people began to understand, what does inclusion mean? You can't have the diversity unless you have the inclusion. And it was quite tricky because we're giving feedback that felt very personal to the firm, rather than, hey, listen, this is what we need to do to get better at. People don't feel included. And here are some examples of why. Like, for example, when you go into a meeting room and have your weekend meeting, all the partners sit around the table and then everyone else is around the sides. What does that tell you? So there's just something around that people were very defensive of it to begin with, but then began to get the joke and understand what it was about, because we got a few of the partners to join and some of the investors to join the DEI committee. But it really took time. Like, it was a real slow burn. But that's generally where people tend to start, is have a committee and educate and raise awareness. The second thing we did was, off the back of that, was to have education and awareness sessions and doing really interesting things, for example, for Black History Month. And it's a basic thing, but it's hard to start, and bringing people with lived experiences, and then involve people in the organisation who had lived experiences to speak up if they feel comfortable doing that. it starts to become more real as opposed to just a speaker speaking at you. You're like, oh, that was great. And then you go back to your day job. This is like, oh, somebody's really had this interesting lived experience. So they'd probably be the places that I'd start. And that's what we did to start. And they eventually worked quite well.
We are on the recruitment side, and we work with private equity funds and portfolio companies to recruit CFOs, FDs, and their reports. You've naturally worked with a number of exec search firms and recruitment agents when it comes to hiring talent. But what really can we do on this side of the fence to encourage diversity and inclusion as part of our sort of hiring process? And what do you normally look for?
So what I look for is different to what a deal partner looks for. But I would make a decision with them. So I would tend to look at, they also tend to look at your track record in the area, how many private equity firms you can hire for in terms of CFOs, do we recognize any of those names? I would look for things like statistics. I like metrics and statistics. Deal partners are a little bit less interested in that, but if you can say things like that we've hired this many CFOs and actually we've hired X amount of females in that, or something that just brings DEI to life for them that they would recognize and is important to them. Or if it's a company that's made, I'm going to say 10x, but that's not real, is it? But it's a company that's made X amount and it's something that they recognize and that they think is really good and they admire it, that gets the discussion on the table. So for me, it's looking at the statistics. What else do you offer that's really interesting? Do you have networks? Do you do those events where, you bring people to those events and you have that reach into, say, the CFO community? Do you do breakfast? How does it work from a DEI perspective? I think it's also probably the one thing I do know those days, it tends to be guys that come to meetings together and the females with each sector, which is nothing wrong with that, but it's like there is something around that kind of tells you a lot. I tend to know that people would interact with each other. They're very subtle things that, again, at the old I would never look at because it tends to be a lot of guys in that position. But when you point it out, then they notice. So for me, it's about having, speaking about what you preach. Like, for example, I know Esther in your area, like very well, doing a master's together. She really cared about DEI, but I wouldn't know that unless I knew her. So it's that kind of thing. What do you do for your own organization? Do you have any advisory services around this?